Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. This is my year-end review. I apologize for the lateness. I had a bad couple of weeks at the beginning of the month and I am finally into a place where I can actually do this. So I have my phone ready. I have my little book ready, and I've got some stats for you as well as my best and worst of each month. So hopefully this is something that's interesting to you. If not, cool. I'll see you next time. All right, so phone first. All right, I found this thing. It's called my year in books. It's not 100% accurate, but it's fairly close. It says that I read 109 books. That would be total between new reads and rereads, but it only counts each reread one time. And that equals 69,651 books. It says my top genres are fantasy, romance, and young adult, which is 100% me. It also says that I read 85 fantasy, 73 romance, and 55 young adult, which again, wouldn't surprise me, mostly because I read a lot of fantasy romance. All right, that was one thing. I have my Goodreads one. My Goodreads is technically 117. This does count the rereads that I did that I read more than once. And so that was a total count of all the books that I read this year. It says I read 45,000 pages, 45,808 pages. My shortest book is one of the Mercy Thomas books. It's the comic book. I'll put it here for you. One of the longest is a book from the series of We Shall Not Name That Series, because that's one of my, cozy rereads. I also have, my average book length was 391. My least shelved book is called The Damn Doll. I'll put it here. I read it in November, I think. I'm not going to put the most shelved because it's one of those books. My average rating is 4.4. My highest rating and my first book of the year were both ACOTAR books, which makes sense because I was not feeling good this time last year. I was prepping for surgery. I was actually going in for surgery today. So I am 1 year uterus free and endometriosis under control. And then the last little stats thing I have is from Storygraph, yes. I'm trying to make the move over to Storygraph away from Goodreads. Goodreads gets all of the books I read, whereas Storygraph only gets my new reads for the year. My goal was 75. I finished 78. That does include a few novellas. Okay, so I'm gonna do this here now. So as we can see at the top, it is all of last year. I read 78 books. I had different moods. There's quite a few. Pace, I mostly medium pace, which makes sense. A few slow, and then a chunk of fast. Most of my books were in the 300 to 500 range. Most of the books I read were fiction. And then this is my genre look, as well as format, which is not accurate because most of these were audiobooks, but it doesn't say that. I don't know how I managed to not do that. And then we have my top authors, and then they were all in English. I did have some that were translated, as you can see. And then I had my good months and my bad months. October was a terrible month, and November was a fantastic month. So you get the idea. And then we have our star ratings. I don't usually rate things 1 star because if it's 1 star, I will not actually finish it. So that's it for now. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and turn this off now. Okay, and then I figured I would also go over my best and my worst of the year really quickly. This is gonna be a shorter one, but I will go ahead and show them all to you. So I didn't have a worst for January. I only finished one new to me book this month. So my best and my worst were the same book because I only finished the one book. I definitely had books that I listened to, but they were all my favorite rereads, that kind of thing. So none of them were new. And these are only the best slash worst of the books that were new to me. So Ace of Spades is the only book that I finished in January that was new to me. I liked it a lot. I did end up gifting it to my friend Nikki because she was really interested in the book, and it just wasn't a book I'm going to read again. I think that's normal for a lot of thrillers in my head, that I just don't keep a lot of the thrillers because once you know who did it, you don't really need to read it again. But it was a really good book. I did enjoy it, and I gave it a new home. In February, I started the Mercy Thomas series. Moon Called was really good. I liked it a lot. It really got me going on the series. I read several books from the series. I think I'm on book 4, plus I've been working on the novellas as well. At the same token, the worst book of the year is the comic from this series because it was terrible. It was probably one of the worst comics that I've read in a long time. Luckily, it only took me like half an hour to read the whole thing. So it wasn't a huge waste of time, but it was definitely a disappointment. Some of these were harder to do than others. So for March, my favorite book was Lost in the Moment and Found. This book is part of Shauna McGuire's Every Heart a Doorway series, and I really, really enjoy this series. This one particularly was a very tight to my heart one, because this one in particular was about a child who came from domestic abuse. Luckily, she never had, it never got as far as sexual abuse, but it was hinted at. So that is a trigger warning for this book. If you are sensitive to child abuse, like I am a victim of molestation. And so books like this are hard for me if I'm not pre-warned. And they pre-warn you right at the beginning that this one does not, it talks about it, but doesn't go there, which I appreciated in both ways because she got away on time. And that was my biggest wish for when I was a child, is I wish I had gotten away on time. But, you know, not everybody has happy childhood stories. So this one was wonderful to me, and it really hit those places in my heart. As far as the worst book that I read in March, it's going to be Golden. I'm not going to say it was a bad book, because it wasn't. It was fun to read, but it wasn't a well-written book. And there is another book out in the series. I thought it was a duology. I had planned on reading it, but my friend Ash had read it, and she said that it still has a massive cliffhanger. And that just, it bothered me how it ended. There was a lot of little things about the book I didn't like, but it was fun to read when I read it. So it's not a horrible book. It's also not one I would actively suggest that people read, but it is on Kindle Unlimited. So if you're curious, go ahead and read it. All right, so this one starts my love of Adrienne Young. I read Spells for Forgetting, and this was her first adult book. I have, up until this point, read all of her young adult, and this was the first adult book that she had ever come out with, and I absolutely adored it. Adrienne Young is now officially in my auto-buy favorite author category, and I adore her. The worst book I read is called Bearing an Hourglass. This book was stupid. It was definitely written in the 80s. It was for a video that I never finished. If I'll ever finish it someday, maybe, but I don't plan on finishing it right now. I liked the idea and the premise behind the book, but the book was pretty bad. And this book kind of just derailed the whole video idea for me. I'm hoping that I will possibly be able to pick it up again someday and maybe start with keep the premise, not necessarily the video that I started. So this was definitely the worst book that I read this month. In May, my best book of the month is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I loved it so much. And I know for a fact that V.E. Schwab is very, very well loved, very, very cultish how much people love their writing. I have numerous books from them, but I've never read any of them. So this is the one and only V.E. Schwab book I've ever read. Like I said, have lots of them. I have a whole section. I don't know if they're all together right now because they probably aren't, because this is just a big mess behind me. But I do have quite a few. And it does make me want to read more of them, but everyone who loves Addie didn't really care for her other work and vice versa. But I love fantasy romance, and I love fantasy, and I love historical fiction, and these are all things I really care about. And I know that a lot of her books are fantasy. A lot of them have love interests, not all of them, but a lot of them do. And then this one in particular was historical fiction, which again, it also has a fantastical tint to it. So all of these things make me think that I would actually really enjoy reading her other work. I just have not yet. This was a good month. A lot of the books that I read I really liked. The only book that I read that I didn't like is this one. So this is Ever After. I loved the queerness of the book. I loved how all different sexualities and genders were shown, and it was all seen as totally normal. Nobody had to come out. It was just there. Really appreciated that. However, I despise the miscommunication trope. If one conversation makes the entire book null and void, it makes me very angry. And that's what this book had. One conversation, just one, would have cleared up the entire book. And that bothers me on many, many levels. So this one was definitely not my cup of tea. It was cute, it was D&D, it was very queer. Loved all those things. Hate the fact that one conversation makes the entire book pointless. So, yes. All right, so June. It's Fourth Wing. I really liked Fourth Wing. I also liked Iron Flame. Iron Flame did not make my list of best or worst. But I really liked Fourth Wing. I was one of those girlies that was like, oh my God, it's so wonderful. So I'm sorry to disappoint, but Fourth Wing was my favorite book of June. Literally the only book that I could think of for my worst book of this month was Dowry of Blood. It was 4 stars. When your worst book of the month is 4 stars, it was a really good month. And there's a couple of months in here where I was like, this is not a bad book. This is the worst book that I read this month. That does not mean it was a bad book. It was really good, actually. It's about the wives of Dracula. It was the slowest book I read, and it was definitely the most thought-provoking. Like I said, not bad. I gave it 4 stars. It is definitely not a bad book. But oddly enough, it was probably the worst one I read in that month. July. I am coming to realize that I really like cozy fantasy. So my favorite book in July was Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. This one was super cute, super cozy. I love the cozies. I love cozy mysteries. I love cozy fantasies. I love the cute, squishy romances. I am a sucker for the cozy stuff. So this one was definitely my top for the month, and I'm really looking forward to the next one coming out, and it should be out today. Today's the 16th. So yes, it should be out today. So I'm very hopeful that this book will, this next one will be just as good as the first one. I really, really enjoyed it. I won't be getting to it right away because I have been told that I'm finishing Sarah J. Maas books because Crescent City 3 is coming out and I have not even started them yet. But I also haven't done Silver Flames, so guess what I'm reading right now? Silver Flames. I'm not allowed to read anything else until I'm done. Which is fine. I'm excited, I'm enjoying it. Okay, I wanted to give an honorable mention here that I read The Ballad of Ever After. This one was, again, really, really good. I really enjoyed it. The reason I'm giving it an honorable mention is because I did not like Caraval. Caraval was fine. The second one, that I can't even think of the name of, was not so fine. And I don't even remember the end of finale. I literally had to go on to groups and ask people to give me spoiler synopsises of the end of finale because I was starting Ballad. And I was a little bit confused because I couldn't remember exactly how finale ended. So keeping in mind that I did not like Caraval, I gave away my copies because the series annoyed me. I love the Ballad. I think they were really good. I do think Curse for True Love was a very big disappointment. I was not happy how it ended, just because it took so long for the ending to get going. And because of the main trope in the third book, Nikki is very angry with the book. So keeping in mind that I didn't like Caraval and I'm not a huge fan of how it ended, I really, really did like the Ballad books. As far as my worst book for July, it's going to Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow. I know this book was very, very well loved. I know that there's so many people that despised this, I know that this book is very well loved. I know there's many people that absolutely adored it. I did not despise it, but I also did not like it. And I held on to it for a little while trying to decide if it was something that I was going to keep or not. And I ended up just giving up and getting rid of it because I really did not enjoy the book. I enjoyed parts of it. I loved all of the parts where they were doing the video game stuff. I really enjoyed that portion of it. I also enjoyed the portions about some of their lives, but I feel like it just went too long. And I had the same problem with a couple of other books. Those ones that last for decades, to me, end up feeling so drawn out, where you get little bits and pieces of different timelines in books, and nothing is cohesive, and it kind of bothers me. It feels like a memoir, and it just wasn't something that I want to read again. So that was my worst book. It wasn't terrible. It was 3 stars. It just wasn't good either, and I didn't keep it. August was another good month. The best book that I read was Delilah Green Doesn't Care. I really love this book. I loved all 3 of them. I have now finished all 3 of these books, and they are so cute. If you want a cute sapphic love story with some angst and some snark and a lot of humor, these are wonderful books. I adored them, all 3 of them. So this one is definitely my top favorite of August. The worst book that I read this month, again, it's the worst book I read this month. I think it was 3.5 stars. Maybe it was 4, I don't know. I really did enjoy it though, and it's called the London Seance Society. And the only reason that it was the worst book that I read was because I went through this bunch of books like this. I read Immortality, and I'll put the books here so you can see them. It's the ones that look like the brain and the heart. I liked them a lot, but the London Seance Society had a very similar feel. They were all kind of Victorian. They all dealt with a female main character that was doing something that wasn't necessarily appropriate for her station. Not to be confused with Stalking Jack the Ripper, because the way that they did it in Stalking Jack the Ripper I really didn't like, because they spent the entire time talking about how she's not allowed to do these things. Whereas they didn't really talk about that very much in these books. These books were very much, it was known that these were things that women weren't allowed to do or weren't supposed to be doing, but they did them anyways. And all 3 of them had just really similar feels, and I'm having a hard time spacing the books out and figuring out which one was which. And so the London Seance Society ended up being kind of wiped from my brain, not because it was a bad book, but because I read too many things that were similar to it in a row. I also had the same problem with my books in December. I read all of Ali Hazelwood's books one right after the other, And because I read them all together, they all blended together because they were so similar. So the same thing happened. So the only reason that the London Seance Society is my worst book of the month is not because it was a bad book, but just because it kind of faded into the background because of the other books I read around it. September. My best book of the month. I honestly had to pick this book, and I can't explain to you why. It was kind of terrible, and I really, really loved it. And it literally, I read it at the very end of September, and it put me in a book slump, and I read almost nothing in October because of it. It's called Womb. This is splatterpunk. They call it extreme horror. It's extremely gross. I wouldn't call it extreme horror. It wasn't scary. It was just very short, gruesome. I spent a lot of time making faces, and Nikki spent a lot of time laughing at me and taking pictures of me making faces and sending them to our group chat with our mutual best friend. So me and Nikki are in person real life friends, and then her and Carrie are also in person real life friends, and then me and Carrie are online friends that will hopefully be in person real life friends sometime in the near future. But she spent the entire time taking pictures of me and putting them in the group chat for Carrie because I kept making dirty faces. I did not rate this book, and because I didn't rate this book, I can't tell you why I picked it as my favorite, but it did put me in a book slump that lasted an entire month almost. So yeah, that was fun. If you want more information on it, let me know, because I would love to share more information on this book. I just don't know how, because it's just, ooh, yeah. All right, so my worst book of the month. Like I said, I'm not a huge memoir person, so it's my worst book of the month. It does not mean it's a bad book. It's counting the costs. I found it very interesting, and I very much enjoyed listening to it. Because Jill Duggar reads it herself, and I found it very interesting to hear about their lives, because I've been mildly obsessed with the Duggars for years, since they pretty much started. I remember watching them when they were brand new, and I remember being so bummed when everything came to light and they canceled the show, and now I kind of hate them because of listening to this book, and I'm even more intrigued by this lifestyle and how it all works, and I'm just, yeah, it's disturbing to say the least. All right, my October, this is a slump month, so I only read a couple books. My best book in October was Belladonna, which gets right back to the whole London Seance Society. This is kind of a historically-ish fiction with magical elements that have a main character who's doing things that aren't necessarily proper. It was really good. I'm looking forward to reading Foxwood. I did get it from the library. I just haven't read it yet because I have other things I'm supposed to be reading. So I put myself back on hold for it later. So hopefully I'll get it again in a couple of weeks when I'm ready for it. But it was really good. I liked it a lot. It was definitely the best book that I read. I am looking forward to reading the other ones, and I'm glad that's only a trilogy, so I only have to wait for Wisteria now. Worst book in the month. Again, we're gonna go with a memoir. This one is The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. I'm giving it the worst spot because A, it's a memoir. B, it's not written by her. I mean, it's not read by her. The audiobook is not read by her. It's read by somebody else. And because it definitely wasn't well written. It's very jumpy. You're missing a lot of information. There's a lot of plot points that you're kind of like, where does that come from? And everything that I read about the book is that it was supposed to be substantially longer than it was, and I think it kind of needed it because I feel like we just jumped. We have a lot of information at the beginning and a lot of information at the end, and the entire middle, which was the part that I found the most intriguing, was just skipped over. So I would be very interested to know what got cut out of that book. Again, it was not a bad book in any way, shape, or form. I definitely feel for Britney. I am old enough to know to remember when all this stuff happened. It all happened when I'm a very similar age to Brittany. And so I remember kind of going through some of these big life things at the same time that she was going through some of these big life things. And watching her lose her crap over it was definitely interesting at the time. And it makes so much sense now, having read this book and understanding why she did it. And I very much feel for her. I very much am anti-Justin now. And even though this was the worst book that I read, it was not a bad book at any means. But it definitely could have been edited differently. And I really wish that we had had more information on some topics that were just kind of glossed over. All right, now we're to November. This is the Bonds the Tie series. I'm gonna put the first book up here, but it's the whole series. And this is one of those ones that I binged all the way through from start to finish. I was getting the audiobooks because the physical books weren't getting to me fast enough. And so I literally was finished with book 2 before it arrived at my house. I did go through and do a listen and read at the same time for the last 1 or 2. And I really, really enjoyed it. This series is kind of a dystopia. It is about these people in the future who have bond mates. They all have magical powers, and depending on who your bonds are depends on how powerful you are. There's lots of like little things that go into this, but it is basically about this girl who was powerful and found out that she had numerous bond mates, like 5 or something, and nobody knows what her power is. She won't let her power go. She's got it locked up tight inside her, and she won't let it leak out. So people all assume that she has no powers, even though she does. She's extremely powerful because she's got so many bond mates. And I, for the life of me, cannot remember if it's 4 or 5. But because of the situation, she has people that want to use her because she's so powerful, and she's on the run from them. And then at the beginning of the book, she's caught, and it's the journey that her and her bondmates go through in order to figure out how they feel about each other. It's definitely got a heavy romance to it. They do get smuttier as the books go on. The first book isn't smutty at all, and then they just progressively get smuttier. This is very much an adult book. It does kind of read YA-ish because it's so fast-paced and because our protagonist is young. If I had a better, I would say 18 plus. I would say new adult. I would say in that 18 to 25 range is where it would probably be perfect. I very much enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. Nikki very much enjoyed it. She thought it was a lot of fun. She started it, got me into it, and barely finished before me because I was blasting through these things. It was really, really good. If you want more information, let me know. I don't even know how to describe this book. It was so good. So it was the whole series. It's a whole 6-book series, and it was fabulous. 5. Okay. There's 5 bonds. There we go. I was pretty sure there was 5. Okay. Anyways, moving on. The honorable mention for this month is Iris Kelly, because I finished off the Delilah Green series with Iris Kelly and I adored it. It was so wonderful. Okay, so the worst book that I read this month was The Fire Endless. The Fire Endless is the sequel to The River Enchanted, which is a Rebecca Ross book. Rebecca Ross also wrote another book that was really big this year that I am not going to mention because it is under the banned books because there's different publishers. And I had to triple check to make sure that this book was not the same publisher as the other book. It does not. I really liked the River Enchanted. It's about this guy who is a bard. He plays the harp, and he had to leave his enchanted island to go to university and to become a teacher. And then when things got bad on his island, he was called back so that way he could play on his island again, because the bards have special powers to be able to play for the spirits. I thought that the series started off really good. I thought that the end of it was meandering. I feel like the first book was a solid 4 stars. The second book was maybe 3 stars. And it just meandered a lot for the whole beginning of the book. And it just felt, meh. It ended wonderfully. I loved the ending of it. I feel like getting from the first book to the ending of the second book was difficult, which makes me a little bit worried about the other book that I'm not going to name, because I've heard similar things about the second book in that duology also. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe she doesn't end series well. I know we talked about The Ballad of Ever After earlier, and The Ballad of Ever After, I feel like Stephanie Garber has a similar issue with not being able to end book series well. So like the first book or two is good or fine, or depending on how you feel about Carvel. But the third one it was meandery. And I feel like the ballad books were the same. The third book was meandery. And so if you've read the ballad books and The Curse for True Love and the way that it started and how it just took forever for anything to happen, for any conclusions to happen, and then it just finished fast, and that bothered you, it's the same problem that I had with An Endless Fire. It was a lot of meandering before it finished. So that's why it's my worst book of the month. I did not appreciate that fact about the book at all. So we're gonna move on. I'm going to hope that Rebecca Ross knows how to end books soon, because her first books are all really good and I just don't know if I like the seconds. And then my top book for December is sitting in front of me because I just did my December wrap up. So I'm going to go ahead and hold up the real book. This is actually not the real cover for the real book. It doesn't have a real cover, but this is another Adrienne Young book. Adrienne Young made it on here a couple of times for both of her adult books. This one is The Unmaking of June Farrow, and this book was really, really stinking cute. It's about this woman named June who has a family history of all the women in her family going crazy. Her mom did it, her grandmother did it. Her grandmother's descent into madness was much slower than her mom's, and she's really concerned about her mental health. And when she starts to have visions, she starts to freak out because she's concerned that she's going to go insane even faster than her mom did. The story was really interesting, what the mental health stuff is, how it's portrayed. It's definitely a magical realism situation, a lot like her first book was. I can't tell you what is actually going on with June. I will say that I like the way it's played out. I think it's really good, and Adrienne Young is definitely a favorite author of mine, and I really, really enjoy her books, and I'm looking forward to her next adult book coming out. I know there was something that they were talking about, but I can't remember what it was. But this one it was so good. This cover is beautiful, by the way. I mean, it's so pretty. Look. And now that I know what it all means, I love it even more. This is definitely the highlight of the end of the year, was this book. It was so good. And then the last book that I have to talk about, the worst book of December, I cannot talk about because it is a Wednesday book and it is banned for the St. Martin's Press situation. So I cannot talk about it. All I will say is that I did not like it. I was very, very disappointed in it. I almost DNF'd it, and I don't know if it would have been better if I had or not. If you are curious what that book is, you're more than welcome to DM me and I will tell you, and I will tell you why also. But I have heard good things about the book that I didn't like, but it just definitely did not do it for me. But we have been talking for a very long time. I figured the stats part would take up more time, but it turns out the best and the worst of the month took a long time instead. it is now getting dark and I have an Amazon shift to go to. So I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye for now. And I have a couple of videos filmed now, so I just need to get them edited and uploaded so that you guys can actually see them. And I will talk to you again soon. Bye.